Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. Yesterday, BioWare released around 20 minutes of gameplay footage for Dragon Age: The Veilguard. I did a live stream reaction to the footage, and there'll be a link in the description for that content. But I wanted to do this video a little bit differently because there's actually a ton of information available about the game that you can't pick up by just looking at the footage. So this video will be an opportunity to not only walk through my thoughts regarding the footage, but also some of the other tidbits that I've picked up. I want to say right off the bat, I'm honestly really excited about this game. I repeat what I believe I said in the last video regarding the cinematic trailer. I don't think we're going to get a classic. I don't even think we're going to get a game that's of the same level of quality as some of the other Dragon Age games in the series. But I do think we're going to get a good game that'll be enjoyable, that'll have some entertaining aspects to it, and I'm looking forward to playing this. So let's go ahead and walk through why. First, I'm going to start with what I like about everything I've heard, and then I'll absolutely walk through some of the things that I dislike. And I'm sure some of those will be similar to the reservations you all have after looking at that gameplay footage. So getting into things that I like, I want to start with what you cannot tell from just looking at the gameplay footage, starting with character creation. Dragon Age: The Veilguard will have origins, the same way Dragon Age Origins does, except these origins will be based on factions, not your race. So you can join the Grey Wardens, or you can join the Shadow Dragons, and then you'll get specific buffs to your character based upon your choice, along with specific dialogue options and some reactivity for people who realize you're a part of these organizations. It's also going to impact the beginning of your game and decide what party members you start the game with. Really, really cool stuff. I thought the origin system in the first Dragon Age game was one of the highlights of the entire series. It's so weird to me that more games haven't tried to use a similar system, and so it's great to see it return here. You'll also be able to choose from all the races you've been able to select previously, so human, dwarf, elf, and Qunari are all available. This is really nice. I was afraid we wouldn't be able to beat Qunari since a lot of the game is based in Tevinter and they are at war with the Qunari at this time. But it looks like that will be an option. Really awesome. And in a very interesting choice, they've basically implemented a Dragon Age Keep system into character creation. Now, for those who don't know what Dragon Age Keep is, when you played Inquisition, which was the third game in the series, BioWare created a separate website you could go to where you could select tarot cards that would help decide what are the choices you made in Dragon Age 1 and 2. And then it would import all of those decisions into your Inquisition playthrough to make sure it felt like a seamless experience. And part of this was because of the technological limitations with the code in Dragon Age 1 and 2. They felt like it wouldn't transfer in clean, and so the website helped to ensure that all of your choices came in the right way. That was interesting, but of course, websites can kind of go defunct, they don't work properly, all that kind of stuff. So it's really cool to see that a similar system is going to be implemented as part of the character creation for Veilguard. And you're going to be able to make decisions about how the Inquisitor from the last game looks and some of the decisions that they made during that game. The question, obviously, is going to be how many decisions are you able to carry over, and how much will those decisions actually impact your experience? If it's just one or two major things you can decide, that's not as interesting. The Dragon Age Keep really lets you get granular, brought over a huge amount of choices, and many of them actually impacted your playthrough. Hopefully it's the same way here. I'm definitely looking forward to trying it out. Now, Veilguard will stick with the same three classes that have always been in the game: Mage, Rogue, and Fighter, but BioWare has stated that there are going to be very large skill trees for all three classes, and there's going to be a lot of different options for how you set up not only yourself, but your party members as well. So you can set up characters to be good at attacking specific types of enemies. You can have healers, you can have all-around characters, etc., etc. Very exciting to see what type of combos are going to be available based upon the systems that they've placed in here. They've already shown that you can weaken enemies and that some abilities can be comboed off of that weakened status. Supposedly, there's a bunch of elemental combos that you can do as well. So while I'm not particularly impressed with combat, and we'll talk about that more in the dislike section, I am definitely excited to see how we're able to build up all the different characters. There's also going to be some base building in the game. Me personally, I love having a base that I can build up, similar to what we were able to do with Skyhold and Inquisition. Many people have mentioned sitting on that throne and passing judgment on characters that you meet throughout the game was a ton of fun, and I absolutely agree. BioWare has said that the base building is not going to be to the same degree that it was in Inquisition, but there will be some base building mechanics in the game, and I'm looking forward to finding out what that means. Another thing that has been announced that I'm a big fan of, Dragon Age the Veilguard will not have an open world. Instead, it's going to have a mission-based structure. What I'm hoping that means is that a lot of the areas that you explore are set up much differently than what we experienced in Inquisition. I loved Inquisition from a story standpoint, from the amazing party members and their dialogue and the relationships you could develop with them. But I thought the way exploration worked in that game was terrible. It felt like an MMO. It felt like there were large open spaces where there was oftentimes very little to do, and what you did do felt very repetitive. And so my hope is that by going to a much more closed system, they're going to be able to populate a lot more of the areas that you see with things that are interesting to do. Speaking of which, BioWare's also said quests will have optional paths and secrets. So it seems like in these smaller, perhaps more linear areas, there's going to be a lot more secrets that you'll be able to explore, and hopefully exploration in general will be handled much better than it was in the last game. All right, the last thing I want to bring up that I really like that's not apparent from the gameplay footage is that companions who you do not romance will romance other characters, which I think is really cool. I think it makes the world feel so much more alive when all of the party members are not just sitting around waiting for you to love them. So that was a big, big deal in Inquisition. Almost all of your party members develop either friendships or romances with each other, and a lot of times those relationships were very unique. So people could be friends in different ways. Really, really cool stuff. I'm happy to see a similar system come back, and I'm really curious to find out how are these characters going to connect with each other and other NPCs in the world. One last quick note, since we're on the subject of party members, I mentioned in my last Dragon Age video that I was really unhappy that Varric was involved and was a party member. I do want to make the correction. It looks like he's not a party member, more so an advisor to the overall group. I still don't like his inclusion so prominently in the game. I feel like he should be in Kirkwall, he should be a Viscount, and they should have chose someone else, Dorian, hint, 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 that would serve in this role for the party. But at least he's not a party member, so I'm not going to complain about it too much. All right, now that we've gone through all of that, let's talk about what I liked from the gameplay footage that we've seen thus far. There was an immediate focus on what Solas is doing. In my last video, I mentioned I felt like BioWare, based on the cinematic trailer, was straying away from the threads that were left by Solas's actions. And it seems clear to me from these 20 minutes, that's not the case at all. Solas is front and center along with what it is that he's doing. Of course, I'm still not sure if what I want out of this story is going to come to pass. What I really want is an elven slave uprising. It appears that Solas is positioning himself as someone who is going to unite the elves and convince them to strike back against their human masters who have been oppressing them all series. And the first time I play this game, I absolutely plan to play as someone who is helping Solas, tearing down that damn veil and bringing the elves back up to the status where they should actually be. Will the Veilguard let me do that? I don't know, but I'm really hoping at least they allow me to explore that thread. Another thing I really like about the game is Tevinter. In my opinion, Tevinter looks outstanding. Yes, the game overall is a little more cartoony than what I would prefer, but it's not nearly to the level that we saw in the animated trailer. And I really appreciate that Tevinter looks so distinctive from Ferelden, from Orlais, from the other places that we've already experienced. It really seems like BioWare went all out to say, you're not in Kansas anymore. This is a whole new environment. And I felt that right from the beginning of the footage. Another thing that I appreciated is it seems like they're giving stoic dialogue options a lot more energy than I felt like they had in Dragon Age Inquisition and Dragon Age 2. So for those of you who haven't played those games, Dragon Age uses a dialogue wheel, and the options on the wheel have small phrases that give you an idea of what you're going to say, but it doesn't tell you word for word what your character is going to say, which allows you to have some control, but at the same time allows you to be surprised by how conversations play out. Now, to help ensure that you convey the exact message that you want to, each dialogue option is paired with a symbol that shows in the middle of the dialogue wheel that tells you, all right, is this a stoic option? Is this sarcastic? Is it mean-spirited? All that kind of stuff, right? This system is very interesting, but the problem with it previously is that sarcasm was head and shoulders above any of the other options. I think they did this a little bit better in Inquisition, but definitely in Dragon Age 2, Sarcastic Hawk was better than any other Hawk you could possibly play. It had a lot more energy. There was a lot more entertaining exchanges. Just everything you could think of, Sarcastic Hawk was just clearly better. And so my hope is that in the Veilguard, they're going to do a better job of making all the dialogue options a little bit more even. And I'm hopeful about that because in the gameplay footage, what you can see is when a stoic option is selected, the character's posture changes, his vocal inflection changes, and it felt like the camera shifted in a way to make his posture more readily apparent. So to me, I could be wrong, but it just seemed like there was more effort placed into making those dialogue options a little bit more forceful, a little bit more interesting than what I saw in the previous two Dragon Age games. And that's really exciting. I'm hoping that it's going to give the game a little bit more replay value from a dialogue standpoint. And then the last thing I'll mention that I enjoyed about the trailer is that it definitely seems like the game is going to throw a lot of choices at us. Even in this first 20 minutes, there were multiple situations where you were able to make choices that impacted party members' approval. And even more importantly, there was one choice where you could decide to put a party member in danger, which is very interesting because, in my opinion, it's rare that we get an RPG where it's possible for one of your party members to die based on decisions that you've made, as opposed to you actually trying to kill them. So this was a big thing in Mass Effect, and many people have been calling Veilguard basically Dragon Age Mass Effect. I think it's a fair comparison, but honestly, it's one that I like. Mass Effect is my all-time favorite series. I've always considered Dragon Age very different from Mass Effect, so I can definitely see why some people are disappointed in this switch. But I think there's an opportunity to create a game that still feels true to Dragon Age, but has some Mass Effect features implemented in. It also makes the choice of only giving you 2 party members more interesting, because I'm wondering if part of the reason they've done this is to make those sequences where you have to let go of one of your party members even more impactful, because that means it's impactful not just from the standpoint of, hey, this party member could die. It's also impactful from a mechanic standpoint because you only have 3 characters to work with. So what if you let go of your tank and then you've got to figure out how to just make it work with your other 2 characters? That's a lot more interesting than it would be if you had a party of 4. Now, with this long list of things that I really enjoyed about We Know so far, you might think that I'm 100% on the bandwagon and everything's all good, but that definitely ain't the case. I got some strong reservations about what we've seen thus far, so let's go ahead and talk with them. I first have a couple of small things to note that I picked up from watching the footage that definitely struck me the wrong way. There's a sequence where you're running through Tevinter and you see these demons running across the pathway. You have no opportunity to actually attack or stop these demons. And there are multiple times where they basically kidnap civilians. And you hear the civilians screaming while you and Varric just keep running along. I hated that. I absolutely hated that. I feel like the game should give you a choice about what kind of character you are instead of just letting Varric lead you around by the nose. A hero, a true hero, would say, I'm not just going to stand by and allow this to happen. Yes, what I have to do is important, but I also need to go ahead and save whoever I can. There was barely even a conversation about, hey, this is happening. We need to help these people. And I feel like that's wrong for anybody who's trying to play a more heroic character in Dragon Age. I say this is a small thing because an interaction like this is probably rare. Most of the time when demons pop up in front of you, you probably will get the opportunity to fight them. But the fact that happened here, it just rubbed me kind of the wrong way. Speaking of your main character, I'm not a fan of Rook being his name. I assume that's not just a nickname from Varric because it's also what the developers have been calling your main character as well. Of course, there's the possibility that you're going to get a different nickname throughout the game, but I don't know. Going from the Herald of Andraste or the Hero of Ferelden to Rook, it's not working for me. I gotta be honest with you. It's not really working for me. Again, I say this is small. Most likely we're going to get something else over time, but I think they could have chose something better to start with. So those are the small things. Now let's get into the things that I don't like that I feel like are a bigger deal and might impact my overall playthrough. First, we'll start with something that you can't pick up from just looking at the gameplay footage. All of the party members are player sexual, which means that regardless of your race or your gender, you will have the option to romance all of the party members. I do not like this. I feel like your sexuality is part of your personality. It's part of your identity. And I think it dumbs down your party members when they're just open and available to you no matter what. I know in a fantasy game, people hate it when you compare it to real life, but you need to take from real life to make things feel more realistic. It just is what it is. In real life, a person might see you as very accomplished, have a ton of respect for you, feel like you're a friend, and yet still have no romantic or sexual inclination to you. All right. And so I hate seeing these games where they're like, just because you do great things and you do favors for these people, well, now they're romantically available to you. That to me is poor character development. It works in Baldur's Gate 3 for sure. Larian did a fantastic job with those party members. I get that. And I understand that most likely Baldur's Gate 3 is part of the reason why all these characters are asexual. But I also want to point out, it doesn't work at all in Dragon Age 2. I think the way romance was handled in that game was terrible, and it was probably the worst in the series, in part because of the asexual nature of your party members. And yeah, without having played this game, hey, maybe they handled it fantastically similar to Baldur's Gate 3, but offhand, I don't like it. And I think it's going to negatively impact your relationships and interactions with party members. Another thing I don't like about what we know, and it's readily apparent from this gameplay footage, combat looks terrible. Now, I can say that, I can acknowledge that, but I want to make it clear, this doesn't bother me as much as it bothers a lot of you, because combat really isn't the main thing that I care about when it comes to a game. I'm all about Story, writing, dialogue, relationships, plot lines, villains. Those are the type of things that really impact me. Combat is just some stuff I do in between getting to what I really want to do in most RPGs anyway. So it doesn't bother me as much, but man, this is hack and slash. It is button mashing. BioWare has already made it clear you're going to have significantly less control over your party members. Again, they're leaning more towards Mass Effect, where the only control you have over party members is maybe to trigger their abilities sometimes, but you cannot take direct control of them. In fact, Rock Paper Shotgun did an article on this, and they said from the 45 minutes that were available to them, it looks like party members are basically like your entourage. Like really, you control yourself and your party members are kind of just along for the ride, which is absolutely the way Mass Effect works. And so they've decided to implement that here. Even worse, I feel like they're trying to limit how much of your abilities you can actually use. So in the previous games, each ability had a cooldown. So you could use your different abilities, but then each one of them had its own separate time frame where you had to wait before it could be used again. Instead, it appears they're going with a resource system so that you have to build up a specific resource. And then once you use it, not only does that ability have a cooldown, but you've used up some of your resource as well, which could significantly limit how often you can use abilities within the game. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of that at all. And honestly, I think it was a poor choice to make the gameplay footage at the very beginning of the game. I think they would have been better served by showing some mid-game footage instead, where you have access to all of your party member abilities and the main character has more mechanics, and you could get a better understanding of what combat is like. On top of all these issues with your actual team, I'm not particularly impressed with enemies either. The enemy visual design looks uninspiring, especially if you get a close-up of their faces. It looks really freaking goofy. And some of the enemies kind of come off as damage sponges. Again, that could just be because we're towards the beginning of the game and the player that they're showcasing doesn't have all the mechanics that you'll get over time. But just all the way around, combat is not something that I'm excited about at all for Dragon Age based on what they've shown thus far, despite the large skill trees that BioWare has talked about. And this kind of ties into the main issue that I have with what we know and what we've seen thus far. And I think it speaks to the heart of the issue a lot of you all are having with the game. Everything looks more streamlined. Everything looks more streamlined. Everything looks more dumbed down. This is absolutely meant to appeal to a certain type of audience. Now, when we saw the cinematic trailer, the fear was it was appealing to the Valorant crowd and the League of Legends crowd, which would have been catastrophic, right? Absolutely terrible. I don't feel that way anymore, but I absolutely do feel like they're trying to appeal to the Assassin's Creed crowd. And I'm talking about the current version of Assassin's Creed, not the way that it started. They're trying to appeal to the God of War crowd, right? And so all of the RPG elements that were very popular from most especially Origins and to a lesser degree Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition, it seems like all of them have kind of been streamlined and dumbed down to pull in more players who aren't interested in having to manage those type of systems. This obviously is not my preference, but I also recognize I prefer hardcore CRPGs anyway. A lot of players don't have the patience for Wrath of the Righteous, right? And I want Dragon Age to do well. I want more people to play Dragon Age. So I'm not going to automatically just poo-poo on the game because of this, but it has to be acknowledged. It's just obvious. It's obvious the game is being dumbed down for an audience that typically wasn't a big fan of Dragon Age to begin with. How bad that is and how much that damages the player experience, we don't really know yet. For me personally, if the storylines are on point, if the dialogue, the writing, and the payoffs for these quests that we've been waiting 10 years for, if all of that is okay, I'm not going to really care that much that the combat is trash. I'm not even going to care as much that we can only bring 2 party members. If all of that is on point, I'm going to be satisfied. And it looks at least like they're going in that direction. But obviously, we won't know until the game actually comes out. Those are my thoughts, my likes and dislikes about what we know thus far. I would really love to hear from all of you. Let me know down in the comments. How do you feel? Did the gameplay footage change your thoughts on the new Dragon Age at all? Are you looking forward to it? Are you planning to purchase it? Is there any particular content regarding the game that you would like to see from me? Let me know. I'm always happy to hear you all's thoughts, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.